Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the You Ought to Know a Beer Industry Employee webinar series, sponsored by the Beer Institute, one of the nation's oldest trade associations representing beer brewers, beer importers, and suppliers to the industry. I'm Jim McGreevy, President and CEO of the Beer Institute, and we are pleased to have you all here this morning. This is our first You Ought to Know a Beer Industry Employee webinar of 2021, and I'm proud to say that we're going to be providing profiles of supplier companies to the beer industry throughout the course of the year. And we're going to start this year with the wonderful folks at MicroStar Logistics, the nation's leading keg solutions provider. So you're going to be hearing from us periodically through the year with some interesting folks who help beer brewers and beer distributors and retailers run operations for the beer industry that get those great products throughout the country. I'd like to welcome this afternoon Matt Trim. Matt is the operations director at MicroStar Logistics, one of the world's largest owners of kegs, and we're going to talk a lot about how kegs move from one place to the next. We're going to talk about how the beer in a keg gets into the glass so that you can enjoy it. And I'm just very pleased to welcome Matt Trim to the webinar. Thank you for being here today, Matt.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Jim. I've been excited about doing this interview.
Thanks. Why don't we start by you just telling us a little bit about the unique role that kegs play in the beer industry?
Yeah, well, kegs are unique in themselves. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience here in a little bit, but for now, kegs, there's really three things that I can think of, Jim, that make kegs unique. The first one is that they are super efficient at transporting beer. And because they're so efficient at transporting beer, for the whole supply chain, it's the best price model that you can have because of that efficiency. So that's number one, is the transportation. Number two is that if you talk to most brewers will tell you that the best way to enjoy a beer is draft beer, and kegs provide. The third option is sustainability. Kegs are reusable, and therefore they are very sustainable from that front. And MicroStar's program in general really supports that sustainability, which we'll talk more about also in this interview. Just a fun fact for you, the MicroStar float is about 6 million kegs. And if you were to stack those side by side, that would stretch all the way from Los Angeles to Chicago. So that's a huge amount of kegs.
So that's a lot of kegs stretching across the country. A lot of kegs that you own and move around and sometimes have control of and sometimes don't. And we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about sustainability. We're also going to be taking questions from our viewers. And if you have questions and you're watching on the main stage, type your questions into the box that's on the right of the screen. And if you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, write your question into the comment section. And I can see them right here. And we've actually already got a few questions, but I have a bunch of questions for you too, Matt. So why don't we start with maybe a little context setting for how a keg works and how kegs move around the country. So tell us, but first, I'd love you to tell us a little bit about your background and how you wound up at MicroStar Logistics.
Yeah, sure, Jim. So I've been in the packaging industry for the beer industry for, gosh, I guess about 18 years now. It doesn't seem like it's that long, but it has been. I started out, that was 18 years ago, actually working for the largest aluminum can manufacturer, which most of you probably know. With them, I started out in engineering. I did plant operations. I ran plants. I did strategic initiatives. I ended up being the director of quality for North and Central America. All along that time, I knew people at MicroStar. Specifically, my current boss, who's the COO at MicroStar, Glenn Opp, a couple of years ago, he called me up and said, hey, I have this position open. Want you to come help us lead the operations function for MicroStar. And I'm like, hey, it's just a bigger can, right? And it's clearly not a bigger can. It's much more than that. But anyway, that whole conversation got me over to MicroStar, and I've been really in that position since. So if I look at like the day in the life of Matt Trim, operations director, that it's really focused into two main buckets, Jim. And those two main buckets are strategy and people. So MicroStar strategy in general is that, hey, we want to provide solutions to our customers. And so when we are providing solutions to our customers, we need to be improving. We need to be looking at all different dynamics of the industry to make sure that the solutions we are providing are meeting the needs of our customers. So what I get to do is we have a lot of great people that work at MicroStar. And so I actually get to work with my teams, take that strategy, overarching strategy of providing solutions to our customers, and I get to implement them at all levels within the operations group. So we get to transfer that strategy. That includes continuous improvement at our facilities. That includes energy conservation. It includes all different aspects to provide better solutions overall for our customers. So that's me. That's the day in the life of what I do.
And you're talking to us from the branding room of one of your facilities in this one in Eagle Pass, Texas, right?
That's correct, Jim. It's actually the branding room, and it's supposed to be a high. And thank goodness this is one of the only air-conditioned places or the rooms in the whole building, and so I get to be in an air-conditioned room. So thanks for the interview.
So it's 100 outside. So just so everyone knows that's watching this interview, it's going to last for about 6 or 7 hours because Matt's not going to want to leave that air-conditioned room and go into the 100-degree weather of Eagle Pass. So so grab a beer and sit back and relax. So why don't we talk a little bit about, we're going to talk a good bit about some of the stuff that you just referenced, but I think most folks watching us would love to know how a keg works, how the beer gets from the keg into the glass to be enjoyed. So why don't you just walk us a little bit through that journey that beer takes to get into the glass, Matt?
Yeah, so I think we have a graphic here to show. You want to put that up? Perfect. That's great. So this is pretty exciting, Jim. I think you're going to like this a lot. So in this graphic, it's a pretty simplified process of a more mechanical process, but I'll walk through it here. So the blue that you see in that graphic is actually a representation of CO2. Sometimes it's nitrogen, but most of the time it's CO2. And the orange you see in there is a representation of beer. So you have CO2 entering in through the top, as you see with that black arrow, and that's entering in through the side of the valve and being forced into the top of the keg. And that downward force is actually forcing beer up through the stem, through the middle, as you can see with the green arrows. And that's being forced out of the keg from the top of that valve, that top arrow you see on top of the keg. That actually goes into a hose usually, and then into the tap handle. So when a bartender or whomever's at the bar station, they pull back on that tap handle, that CO2 forces that beer up through there, through the tube, out the tap handle and into the glass. And so that's, like I said, a real simplistic version of a more complicated process, but it gets the point done.
And that hose is pretty important, right? I mean, we hear a lot in beer about clean lines.
Absolutely.
You want it. There's a lot of maintenance to the kegs that we're going to talk about, but there's also cleanings that can be done right in the bar to make sure that the beer is as best tasting as it could be when it's coming out of the keg.
Yeah, when you're looking for quality of beer, it's a lot of it has to do with cleanliness and making sure that clean, but the kegs are clean, which we're also going to talk about. It's about getting that best flavor and really enjoying the profile that each beer has.
So once the customers drink all the beer out of the keg and enjoy the draft beer that's coming out of there, the keg is empty. So let's talk a little bit about the kegs journey to being refilled and what happens in that instance.
Yeah, I think you're going to like this a lot too, Jim. So I think the best way to put this is to do a scenario. So Jim, you're starting up a brewery, all right? You ready for this? We'll call it McGreevy's Brewery.
Good name.
Prior to MicroStar, what would happen is that you would McGreevy's Brewery, if they wanted to send beer in kegs, they would actually have to go out and purchase kegs. And when they purchase kegs, you'd have McGreevy's Brewery with paint around the outside of the cylinder, and then you'd have an embossing of McGreevy's Brewery, usually around the chime, which is where the handle is on the keg. Well, anyway, so you wanted to send kegs out, you'd fill up those kegs, and you'd start shipping out those kegs that you owned to the different locations. But think about this. So say you wanted to ship, you're in Washington, D.C., and say you wanted to ship to Texas. McGreevy's Brewery would fill up those kegs, say 50 of them, ship them all the way to Texas. I would drink them, or at least some of them. Then you, McGreevy's Brewery, would actually have to go pick up those kegs and ship empty kegs back to your brewery to refill them, only for them to go back to Texas. And that's the best part about the MicroStar program, is that we are basically able to eliminate that reverse logistics associated with that. So to put it into perspective from the MicroStar program, how it operates, so McGreevy's Brewery needs 50 kegs to ship to Texas. You call up MicroStar, MicroStar says, hey, we'll ship you to them tomorrow. And they usually come from a local area within the DC region. So they're shipped in, you fill them up, you send them all the way to Texas. They go into a distributor in Texas. The distributor sends them to bars and restaurants, wherever they end up. And that's it. McGreevy's Brewery doesn't have to worry about those kegs anymore. Once those kegs have been consumed, MicroStar then takes those and stores those locally or sends those into another brewery locally within Texas. And when McGreevy's Brewery needs more kegs, all you do is you call up MicroStar again and say, hey, I need 50 more kegs. MicroStar sends those in locally from DC or the region around there, thereby nearly eliminating reverse logistics associated with empty kegs, which I really hope to talk more about later in the interview, about how that helps the carbon footprint of the industry. But yeah, that's it.
So this really gets to the heart of the mission of MicroStar Logistics. You are creating efficiencies for brewers and distributors and retailers to move the beer around, the kegged beer around the country.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So once the keg sort of gets to from the brewery in Washington, D.C. down to Texas, that keg, once it's empty, is not leaving the sort of local geographic area.
Yeah, for the most part, that's right. That's right, Jim. It's either shipped into a local brewery nearby. A lot of our kegs that go into the Texas area go actually into our Eagle Pass facility and end up in Constellations, being filled at Constellation beverages. But yeah, that's the idea.
And obviously Constellation is, for those that don't know, is in their brewery is just 10 or 12 miles inside the Mexican border.
Right.
Mexican imported beer coming back out, Corona, Modelo, and others.
That's
excellent.
Right.
So now we understand sort of the mission and the way the company moves kegs around. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the MicroStar operation, Matt? Please.
Yeah, sure, Jim. That sounds great. So the model that I just talked about is really the model that started in 1996. And at that time, MicroStar really just owned kegs and was doing that model all over the U.S. And since then, we've expanded substantially. It's kind of funny. I've been watching videos in preparation for this, and every time we produce a video, there's a lot of times we'll put the number of kegs that we own in our floats on that video, and then 10 days later, that number is out of balance, and that video is no longer useful from that standpoint. It's been funny to watch. But anyway, I think we actually have a video that we can watch here as well, if you want to cue that video. Yeah, that video, basically you had a little bit of a taste of everything that we do. We do a lot of movement in kegs in general, but as we already talked, Jim, behind me is the rebranding room, and to go a little bit more in depth about what that means. When a customer comes on to the MicroStar program, we usually inject cash into that brewer by buying their kegs, whether it's 50 kegs, 100 kegs, 100,000 kegs, however many kegs they have. We usually buy those kegs from them. And when we buy those kegs from them, they come in with that brewery's branding on it. That usually consists of the paint around the vessel, and it also includes embossing of their logo or whatever they wanted up on the chime area where the handle is. So what we do is when we buy those kegs and inject that cash in that brewery, we ship the kegs to one of our MQS facilities. And at that MQS facility, we remove the paint that's on the outside of the keg, and then we knurl the brand that's on the chime. Once that is done, as you see on my left side here, you can see kegs back there that have actually had everything removed on those kegs. We then have to rebrand them as MicroStar kegs. And so the rebranding process basically paints the label around it, and then we go and we emboss the MicroStar logo on it. So that's a little bit what is going on, at least in the room that I am here in Eagle Pass, Texas. You know, the beer business is well known for innovation. The innovation of light beer years ago, innovations into IPAs, different styles of beers, and in more recent years, obviously moving into ready to drink and flavored malt beverages and hard sodas. So the brewers are always evolving the products they're offering the consumer. But 1996 was not that long ago, Matt. So another innovation in the beer industry was just the creation of this logistics innovation that allows for more efficiency. Your business hasn't been around that long, and brewers are buying their own kegs and moving them around up until relatively recently. Yeah, absolutely, Jim. It's a great model, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about our recent information that we're attempting to acquire Keg Star. We're in process of acquiring Keg Star. We will talk about that, and but there's a question from David, which actually is a good one, which is, what is the portion of beer delivered in kegs versus bottles and cans? What's kind of the mix around keg beer versus aluminum and glass? Well, pre-COVID, so COVID has kind of shifted that quite a bit. When you have restaurants and bars shutting down across the nation, there is it's difficult to sell a lot of kegs during that time. But pre-COVID, it ranged dependent upon the customer. We had some customers that were 100% kegs, but other customers that were less than 10%. So it depended upon the customer. I would say overall as an industry, it probably hovers somewhere around 15 to 20%. Yeah, excellent. I see that there are some other questions just for those of you that have asked. We'll be getting to your questions as well, but good to sort of set the sense of how much beer in the United States comes in kegs, and also good to know how many employees you have at MicroStar. How many employees do you have there in your various facilities, Matt? Yeah, with pre-COVID, we had about 280 employees total. Of course, because of the on-premise situation and restaurants and bars shutting down, we had to make some difficult decisions. But we hired a lot of great people pre-COVID, and now that things are starting to turn back around, we're hiring most of those great people back.
Oh, very good, very good. I think we have some. I think we actually have some pictures of some of those employees.
Yeah. So the picture you see right here is of our Eagle Pass facility. So that's the facility I'm in. That's the team we have here. And then the next one. Yeah, that's our Green Bay facility. That's the team we have in Green Bay. We also have 2 other facilities which we don't have pictures here for, but that gives you a feel for people that are employed at MicroStar. Great people.
What are some of the unique jobs that you have there at MicroStar?
Well, we have all sorts of really diverse set of skill sets at MicroStar. We have people that spend the majority of their day slinging kegs and moving kegs around, all the way to people that are engineers and are programming and designing and maintaining equipment, really advanced equipment. So we have all sorts, the whole gamut, what you would kind of expect for a manufacturing or an operations. We have all those different people, a lot of great people that are very skilled in a lot of different areas. And I think, yeah, and anybody that wants to come see our operation firsthand, we're up for that too. We love hosting. So I think we also have Jim, a virtual tour that we can kind of video right now.
Yeah, let's take it.
All right. Yeah, so I'm going to narrate a little bit on this. So this is going to be actually a virtual tour of our Eagle Pass facility. We built our Eagle Pass facility really as one of the main things to supply Constellation beverages, which, as you just saw, it does 27.5 million hectoliters a year. This facility is 250,000 square foot and contains all sorts of equipment inside it. We could basically take nearly any damage that is done to a keg and repair that damage. There are a few exceptions where the keg is no longer repairable, which we scrap it. But for the most part, we can do anything. Furthermore, as you can see in that picture right there, we have the world's largest COMAC, which is basically a keg filling line. It's capable of 900 kegs an hour, and we do all sorts of cleaning. We change valves, as you can see right here. There's just so many things that we can do to a keg to really maintain our float. I think we even have kegs that have been in our float for nearly 30 years that we are able just to basically maintain like new. And it's only done through our MQS facilities, as you can see here. So that's more of our storage. I think we can store well over 300,000 kegs in our warehouse here. But that gives you a general feel of what this Eagle Pass facility is like. It took a while to build, really a lot of hard work by a lot of people to put together a capability that we have here in Eagle Pass.
So, so you've talked about the Eagle Pass facility. You mentioned the Green Bay facility. Jim asks, how many other operations and locations do you have other than Eagle Pass and Green Bay, Matt?
Yeah, so we actually have, we have this map. So as you can see on here, we actually have I believe there's eight warehouses that are third party that help support our operation. And then we have 4 main quality services site, which you can kind of see are spread. They're the diamonds or the stars, and you can kind of see they're spread throughout the U.S. to really service the whole of the United States. When you have 6 million kegs, Jim, they can't just all be in one place. So they're all over the place, and so we try to position ourselves strategically throughout the U.S. to make sure that we are seeing those kegs and we are getting through those kegs on a routine basis.
Well, with 8,000 breweries around the country and with hundreds and hundreds of distributors, you really need to be strategically placed all over the U.S., I would imagine.
Yeah, that's right. We are. I mean, we work with all the distributors associated with beer as well. So that's thousands of distributors across the U.S. So that supports that as well.
How many brewers do you have as clients?
Yeah, we have over 700 brewers as clients. We have probably a little over half of the top 50 brewers in the U.S. as well.
Okay. So you have some of the biggest brewers and some of the biggest craft brewers as well.
Yeah, we also do a lot of support for some of the other larger breweries as well, or brewers as well, where we don't really, they're not on the MicroStar program per se from a pay per fill standpoint, but we do support their kegs by helping them to maintain their float through projects, that type of stuff.
Oh, I see. So you have 6 million kegs floating around the country. Mm-hmm. Much of that out of your control. How do you keep track of all of them?
Well, that's a good question, Jim. We have a deposit system that, I mean, if anybody's been to college or been to a party with a keg in it, they kind of understand the deposit system. You know, you go out, you get the beer in the keg, and you pay an extra $30, and you can actually get that $30 back if you return that keg. So that deposit system actually helps to maintain the motivation for tracking and getting our kegs back.
Oh, very good. Yes, as you say, anybody who's in college remembers the $30 deposit, right? You really want that back. I guess you could turn the keg into a coffee table, which we don't recommend, or you could get your $30 back. So actually, I think Alex asks a pretty good question. What is your model, Matt, more advantageous to smaller brewers or larger ones?
A little bit of both. Depends on what. So like a really small brewer that's shipping just around town, there's not a huge advantage, because our advantage is really about being able to eliminate that reverse logistics and the quality of kegs that we provide. We maintain them. I mean, we're good at any level, right? In any size of brewer, our model is good at any size. But you really start to see some larger synergies with larger distribution because of that reverse logistics standpoint. And like I said, though, our quality of our kegs is super important to us, and we maintain kegs and are capable of maintaining kegs at any one of our quality services sites. And so because of that, you know, a brewer of any size, they don't have to maintain their kegs. We maintain them. And then we deal with all the reverse logistics and making sure that keg and that kegs are available to them whenever they need it. So say, for example, a brewer knows that it's going to be a big summer for them. You know, instead of having their own float and being concerned about how many kegs they have available to send out, we have the kegs available for them to send out, so we can ship them in as much as they need. Whereas if they had their own float, they would potentially have to go buy more. They have to own that asset. And our model, you don't have to own the asset. You can focus on the brewing of the beer. You can focus on the stuff that really drove you into the business.
Yeah, I would imagine for brewers of any size, just that sort of the headache alone of dealing with the kegs and fixing them, cleaning them, buying them, keeping track of them, just that, not having to worry about that, and obviously having the efficiency around it is very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. That's exactly right.
How many? So we're talking about 6 million kegs. How much beer is that? Seems like it must be a ton.
Yeah, so I think in 2019 we probably shipped around or had in our kegs around 100 million gallons of beer, probably more than 100 million gallons.
100 million gallons.
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of beer. So
Matt, I assume with the greater efficiency, the better sustainability opportunities you have. Could you talk a little bit about some of those sustainability advantages from the MicroStar model?
Yeah. So the MicroStar model in general is, as I was stating earlier, Jim, we basically can eliminate a lot of the reverse logistics associated with shipping empty beer kegs back to the breweries that were originally filled them. We don't need to do that because we have breweries, over 700 breweries on our program. And so we can ship them all over the US and then just ship them locally after that. or pretty much locally. Anyway, so we, a year or two ago, we actually had John Heckman, who's PhD and executive director at the Anthesis Group, do a study for us to really understand the true impact of CO2 emissions and how being on our program is really supporting the industry from that standpoint. And what he was able to determine was that all the people that are on our program, as a contingent, we saved over 5 million kilograms of CO2 production into the air. To kind of put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of burning 5 million pounds of coal. So that's a pretty substantial amount of CO2 savings as an industry by being on our model.
That is substantial, and obviously, big brewers, medium-sized brewers, small brewers, many of them have goals around sustainability and conservation. Your work there helps them in their work. That's right.
That's right. And we do a lot of stuff too, Jim, on our side. So we have, with our 4 facilities, we every year we have goals associated with sustainability and recycling and really all what you would expect to hear. You know, I have a good example. Was talking with my plant manager here in Eagle Pass, and he was talking about just recently how we had a visit from the mayor because of one of our recycling programs that we have. So when we receive kegs of beer back from the market here in Eagle Pass, a lot of times they come back in with the plastic keg caps and keg collars. And so what we actually did is we partnered with a nonprofit locally here we recycle those keg caps and keg collars to this nonprofit. This nonprofit gets money back from it, and then from that it actually helps children get medical attention that they need. So it's a great program. It's just another example of how we take sustainability very seriously and how some of the programs that we have available.
So it benefits your company, benefits your clients, and it benefits everybody else, it sounds like. That's great.
That's right. That's
very
right.
Very good. Actually, Damien asks a good question. Let's see. Damien's question is, does the number of kegs in use vary seasonally? What's the peak season for keg use? That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. Of course, a lot of beer is consumed during the summer, as you would expect. You know, you have people out the 4th of July, people out, you know, wanting to enjoy the outside weather, wanting to, you know, drink some beer, maybe on a lake, wherever it is. There's a lot of beer consumed during the summer, especially around the holidays during the summer. But there are other peaks throughout the year. But yeah, it is very cyclical, dependent upon what's going on, how hot it is, whether there's a holiday that's coming up where it allows for people to get together and drink beer. So there's definitely peaks and troughs.
So Alexander asks another question, but I want to turn our attention, and I'll ask this, turn our attention to discussion of COVID-19 and how your business was impacted. But I'm going to start by asking Alexander's question. How do you handle surge capacities, especially now since the on-premise is coming back? Is there enough aluminum out there to make more kegs for you to use?
Yeah, first and foremost, the majority of the kegs are made out of 304 stainless steel, so not aluminum. There are some exceptions to that, but all the kegs in the MicroStar float are stainless steel. And from a surge standpoint, we typically are tracking this very closely, and we once again pride ourselves on being solutions providers to our customers, and so therefore we are always looking at data to try to help us to predict surges and make sure that we have kegs available. So we have more kegs available than what can be pulled at any given time. And therefore we understand that well in advance. And so we make sure and position our kegs throughout the nation in the right places so that we can actually be successful at supplying them to our customers.
So let's Matt, let's take the last 15 minutes or so of our time together to talk a little bit about COVID, your response to it at the beginning, and how it's how your business is changing now that we're sort of coming out of it. So how did MicroStar work with merchants to retrieve the beer that was in the kegs in the closed bars? That was, for those of us who remember that March 13 day, 2020, when everything started to shut down, right before St. Patrick's Day, March Madness, NCAA tournament and conference tournaments, Cinco de Mayo, so many great beer occasion holidays were happening around the time bars and restaurants started to close. So those bars, that beer was stuck in those bars. How did you guys work with merchants to retrieve the beer?
Yeah, so that's a good thing. It was totally, for the most people, it was an unexpected consequence of the pandemic. When bars and restaurants started shutting down, you had not only the kegs that were full or partially full in the bars and restaurants, but you had the whole pipeline, the whole network was full of kegs ready to go into the bars and restaurants. And so if the pandemic didn't turn around quickly, then all this beer was going to go out of date, which is what we saw happen. We expected that there would be, MicroStar saw this early, and so we expected that there would likely be around 1 million kegs out there, and I think that there was a Wall Street Journal article as well. You want to show that up real quick that talked a little bit about this? Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. So we expected to have 1 million kegs out there that needed to have beer destroyed, per se, because it was out of date. So we actually had to take several different steps to make sure that we could be a solution provider to our customers and be able to do this. Even if they weren't our customer, we wanted to support the industry in general. So what we ended up doing is we first had to work with the TTB to change the policies around the destruction requirements. And we worked with the Beer Institute. Thanks so much for helping us to get through that, Jim, you and your team there. We were able to get those requirements changed. As soon as we changed those requirements, we actually had to make sure that you can't just send beer down the drain. Beer has a lot of biological activity, microorganisms, and if you send enough of it down the drain to the local municipality, it could throw off their whole waste treatment process. So what we did is at our MQS facilities, we contacted our local municipalities, and we ended up talking with them and figuring out ways to destroy beer on large scales. So that was the second piece. And then the third piece was that our processes and systems were designed to only destroy a little bit of a beer at a time. What was left in the keg as it came back, or every now and then a full keg, but not large amounts of them. So we actually designed equipment and built equipment to decant and destroy beer on large scales. And we did this well in advance of the need. So April, May timeframe of 2020, we were basically ready for our customers and anybody else in the beer industry that needed to destroy beer because it had gone out of date. And we did a lot of it.
So how much beer, Matt, did you end up destroying?
Yeah, we actually we destroyed well over 1 million gallons of beer through this process of out-of-date beer. Furthermore, Jim, if you don't mind me asking a question, I heard that the Beer Institute's working on something with the Hospitality Act associated with that.
Yeah, so so you destroyed 1 million gallons of beer, which is a very sad thing to hear.
It is.
But there was a lot, and there was a lot more spoiled beer out there in the bars and restaurants across the country. Not only that, there was a bunch of obviously spoiled food and other kinds of beverages. So we've teamed up with NBWA and the BA and about 18 other food and beverage trade associations to work on trying to provide a tax credit to the owners of that spoiled or perishable product who were left with it when the pandemic hit. So we've actually, our coalition of beer and food and beverage trade associations and companies has also teamed up with the hospitality industry, and we're part of the Hospitality and Commerce Act, which just was introduced a couple weeks ago. So we're seeing a lot of interest amongst members of Congress signing on to the bill, championing the need to help. Just another way to help restaurants and bars and distributors and brewers get over the pandemic. So we're hopeful that that provision, that tax credit provision, along with the rest of the Hospitality and Commerce Act, will become law at some point here during the legislative session. So so more on that. But gosh, so many different kinds of impacts and consequences that have happened from the pandemic, which we hope is obviously once in a lifetime event. And it sounds like you've sort of innovated a little bit in your facilities to take that spoiled beer, dispose of it properly. Are you seeing changes to your to the way your company operates, or the things that you can improve coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah. So when this all started, Michael Hronika, the CEO of MicroStar, was very clear that we are going to set ourselves. MicroStar was going to set itself up to come out better on the other side of the pandemic, and so we have done that. We took the opportunity to really focus in on what we can control in our facilities. As you can see in the picture right there, we have somebody that's really prepared for all the potential issues associated with the pandemic. But for the most part, we really took the opportunity to improve our situation in our facilities by doing continuous improvement in projects, those types of things. Furthermore, when we started into the pandemic, we really took a look at our safety precautions. We modified every single safety protocol that was associated with personal protective equipment, those types of things in our facilities to improve upon how we were managing it. And that picture that was just shown, we actually even had, like in September, I believe it was last year, we had in our Eagle Pass facility, the Eagle Pass in general was seeing a higher rate of infections and deaths than the national average. So we actually took extra time to implement a couple extra steps in our procedures and protocols to help stave off anybody getting the pandemic or getting the COVID-19. And so there's a lot of different things that we did over there. And one of the big things that I want to talk about, Jim, why we still have time here, is our Keg Star acquisition. So as I was saying, Michael was really adamant that we wanted to come out stronger on the other side. And so as most of you already know, because I already mentioned it, we're in the process of acquiring Keg Star, which is a leading global keg supplier. There's a lot of great people in Keg Star. They have some good technology that may be utilized across the globe. And by acquiring them, we are really providing more solutions to our customers. There's the global footprint solution, and then there's the technology that Keg Star brings that can be married with the technology that MicroStar has to provide an even better solution to our customers. So you combine that all together, we are becoming stronger through what we are doing during the pandemic.
So Matt, you sort of anticipated Ashley's question, which is, what markets are you in outside the U.S.? So where will you be now with this new acquisition?
Yeah, so the acquisition is not fully closed, but we expect it to soon be fully closed. But once that happens, we will be in Australia and New Zealand. We'll be in Europe and UK, Scotland. Basically, those main locations. And then the U.S., and North America in general. So
you're taking the operation global. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. It's great for the company.
One question I probably should have asked 45 minutes ago is, and it's asked here a little earlier, which is, when you retrofit kegs, you were talking earlier about buying the kegs from the brewers, do you make them all in one standard style? I think the answer to that is no. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the different kinds of kegs that you move around the country?
Yeah. So we basically within the U.S. Within our main model, we have basically three sizes of kegs. We have the half barrel, we have the quarter barrel, and we have the 6 barrel. And there's all sorts of manufacturers within those 6 million kegs. We try to focus in and make sure every keg looks like new, as I was stating earlier. But we have some kegs that are 30 to 40 years old, and we can continue to make those kegs look new by maintaining them, by improving upon them in our process. So while all the kegs are not the same in manufacture, they are basically all the same in design and specifications, because that's what our customers expect.
And we ourselves at the Beer Institute use those kegs here for our bar and our events that we have at our bar. So those of you in Washington, D.C. who are interested, once we get back open and operating again in the office, we'll be inviting you over for some of that draft beer that comes out of MicroStar kegs. But I actually think that Jason asks a very good question here in terms of recovery and what you're seeing from your vantage point. He asks, any insights into the state of the on-premise recovery or on-premise prospects for 2021? What are you seeing out there, Matt? Hopefully that gives you hope.
Yeah, so we actually do a lot of analysis. One of my peers does a lot of analysis on this type of stuff, and then we actually have a graphic that's it times out very well here. You want to toss up the open table data? Yeah, so what we see here is that we can track open table, which is basically reservations at restaurants. This information is available on the internet. And it basically, we compare this data to pre-COVID numbers. And so what you're seeing is, like, for example, in Miami, as of March, they are at 101% reservations compared to pre-COVID numbers. So what we find it related to kegs is that there's a very high correlation of keg consumption to this data, probably 95% correlation. And so we look at this data, and if we see the keg consumption changing from this data, or from the track that this data is on, the trends that this data is on, we can expect that to recover and go back to where this data is trending. So that being said, if you look on there, you have a place like Miami, who's really been open since November of last year. And so it's taken about 5-6 months for them to go from 70% to 101%. So you have places like California, who will be opening up here soon. So let's take Los Angeles, who was at 0% for a while, is at 24, 31%. So you can expect over the next 5 to 6 months, as they actually are truly fully open, for people to actually start venturing out and getting back to full consumption of what it was prior to pre-COVID. That's my expectations of how it happened based upon the data point that we have in Miami and other cities where we have this data available.
And as you say, Governor Newsom just announced California's reopening and date certain in June. So obviously one of the bigger states in the country. So that's great. I see Washington from that chart. Washington, D.C. is at 32%, and we're starting to see more and more glimmers of hope there. So as we come out of the pandemic, Matt, what personally are you looking forward to?
Yeah, well, I'm a social being. I love being around friends and family. I love drinking a beer with them as well. I'm really looking forward to going out unhindered, whether it's masks or, being able to go to restaurants and bars, basically getting a lot of the freedoms that I took for granted prior to back once the pandemic's over and everything's been lifted, and doing it safely.
Yes, indeed. I think we could all agree with that. Well, Matt Trim, Operations Director at MicroStar Logistics, we really appreciate you being here today. You're down in Texas, but the next time you're in Washington, D.C., please stop by the Beer Institute, and we'll look forward to serving you a great draft beer. So thank you very much for being here, Matt.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jim. It's been a lot of fun.
Really appreciate it. And thank you all watching from various venues. The next You Ought to Know webinar will be Wednesday, April 28th at 2 p.m. featuring Austin Stein, the plant manager of the Owens, Illinois glass plant in Danville, Virginia. Owens, Illinois is one of the leading producers of glass bottles and jars around the globe. So please put on your calendars Wednesday, April 28th at 2 p.m. For our next installment of the You Ought to Know Beer Industry Employee. So until next time, thank you very much for being here. Thanks to Matt for giving us a great sense of how his business operates, helping brewers and distributors and retailers bring that great beer to you that everyone enjoys. So thank you all. Thank you, Matt. See you again next time. Cheers.